On behalf of Naga Scholar Association, I extend my heartfelt gratitude and welcome you to this international webinar on living in the present Nagas in the 21st century. This is the fourth and the last technical session for the day. Just a gentle reminder that this session is for 1 hour and 45 minutes. Each presenter will be given 10 to 15 minutes followed by Q&A. Let me also remind you that chat box is open throughout the session, so you may drop your comments or questions if you have. For this session, we have Elspeth Iralu. She's now based in US, a visiting assistant professor of indigenous planning and a doctoral candidate in American Studies at University of New Mexico. Iralu's research interests include colonialism and decolonization, indigenous geographies, critical race and visual culture. We are very pleased to have you on board, ma'am. Altogether, we have 4 speakers for this session. First, we have Dr. Vibha Joshi, who is currently a research affiliate of the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography, University of Oxford. She is the author of the monograph, A Matter of Belief, Christian Conversion and Healing in Northeast India, and also the book called The Land of the Nagas. Dr. Joshi's research interests are religious conversion, healing, and Naga material culture, especially Naga textile and museum collection. Dr. Joshi will be delivering on ethnographic museum objects from the Naga Hills in colonial and post-colonial eras to current reimagining. Next, we have Irwin Namte Odio, who is currently teaching in Law Center 2, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. She is also a gold medalist in postgraduate program in human rights from the Indian Institute of Human Rights, New Delhi. She credits herself with an additional diploma course in refugee and humanitarian law from the Indian Society of International Law, New Delhi. Her research interest includes intellectual property rights, traditional knowledge, and gender law. She will be presenting on geographical indication, protecting the heritage of Chakhesang tribe of Nagaland. Then we have Relo Kenny, PhD scholar, Department of Cultural Studies, the English and Foreign Languages, University, Hyderabad. Relo will present on the topic, Cultural Anxiety and Contemporary Naga Society, Production, Performance, and Representation of Naga Folk Fusion Music. Last but not the least, we have Kenisino Neo, PhD scholar, Dibrugarh University, and Dr. G. Kanato Chopi, fellow at New India Foundation, Bengaluru. They will be presenting on the Battle of Kohima and the making of the modern Naga society under the theme Identity, Culture, and Language. We also have Pansi Jami, PhD scholar, the Center for Canadian, US, and Latin American Studies, JNU, and Sachoiba Innak, PhD scholar, Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, JNU, as rapporteurs for this session. I once again welcome all of you, including the audience, who have joined us in this session. To start off with the session, I hand over the session to our chairperson, Elspeth Iralu. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odio. I'm so happy to be with you all today. I'm excited for this webinar. I'm based in the US, so I wasn't able to attend the plenary session, but I'm hoping I can either stay up late or wake up early over the next couple days for more of the sessions. I'm very excited about this session today. The title of this session is Heritage, Practices, and Representation. And when we consider this in the context of the theme of this year's international webinar, Living in the Present, Nagas in the 21st Century, I think the theme of this session speaks to the tensions between perceptions of what is traditional or historic and what's modern or contemporary, and whether those categories are even very useful for our thinking. Our speakers today consider these tensions through examinations of Naga ethnographic collections in European museums, intellectual property rights and traditional shawls, folk fusion music, and the role of the Battle of Kohima in shaping modern Naga society. And as Dr. Odio mentioned earlier, each speaker will have up to 15 minutes to present, so feel free to use your full 15 minutes. And we will reserve time at the end of the session for questions from the audience. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers. And we can start with Dr. Vibha Joshi.
Hi, thank you. I'll try and share my screen, and I hope I am able to. Where is my screen? Yeah, there. Okay. Hi, thank you for inviting me, and I shall start with my presentation right away. So, we do know that a lot of Naga cultural heritage is actually not, I'm talking about historical colonial time cultural heritage, which is collected, is outside present-day Naga territory, and also outside within the state of India. So it is actually outside in Europe and in America. So, sorry, I'll just need to check. So I will concentrate my talk about two collections that I have worked very closely with. One collection in UK, in Oxford, where I'm based, and in Germany, in Berlin. So in Berlin, Adolf Bastian, actually, he was one of the first curators who has visited the first Naga village where there were Christian converts. So it is very, very interesting that he was hosted by E.W. Clark, one of the first missionaries to Naga Hills. I'm not counting Bronson right now. And through his expedition himself and then the commissions that he made to ehlers, we have one of the oldest collections in actually Ethnologisch Museum in Berlin. And I had the good fortune of looking at all the collection and even prepare an exhibition, which I'll come to later. But Bastian's contribution to collecting, ethnographic collecting, is that his idea of holistic material culture, that we collect a material culture of the people to represent not only the ritual aspect, but everyday life. So we have things which are ritual objects, but also everyday objects of pottery and basketry and hoes and sickle and other things from various cultures from the world. And again, with the Naga artifacts, there are a whole range. So you can actually find that the life as it was lived at the time of the collecting, which was from 1880 to 1890s. So it is one of the oldest collections. And then we have about 50 years later, Henry Balfour from Peterworth Museum in Oxford, which also has the distinction of having the largest collection of Naga artifacts in the world. So we have about 7,000 objects and 7,500 photographs, and the collection is still growing because the new researchers like myself keep adding with the modern aspect of what is happening in Naga Hills, in Nagaland, and amongst the other Naga communities. So Peterworth Museum was started in 1884, and Henry Balfour, like Bastian, also toured the Naga Hills, and he was hosted by J.P. Mills and J.H. Hutton, and he commissioned them to collect for Peterworth Museum. So Peterworth Museum actually has some very well documented collection, where we have village, name of the person who wove it, from whom it was collected. So this kind of extensive data is very interesting to the communities from whom these objects were collected, as I'll come towards the end of my presentation. Now, Bastian's distinction is that through his idea, his protege, Franz Boas, took it to America, and it became a way that the museums began to collect all over the world. Now, what is so important about Naga Hills, and how has the studies of different Naga communities have also poured into what anthropology was in the beginning? So anthropological museums actually hosted anthropology chairs. So we have also the idea that anthropology was hand in glove with imperialism. So that is something that we cannot take away from the history of the subject. I'm an anthropologist, so I understand it also. And also, what about the administrators and anthropologists who wrote monographs on various Naga communities? And then they later on went on to occupy academic positions in various universities. So John Henry Hutton, who wrote on the Angami Nagas, on Sumi Nagas, had significant collections, and he ended up occupying the William Weiss Chair of Social Anthropology in Cambridge. James Philip Mills again wrote on Ao Naga, Lota Naga, Ringpa Naga, collected and joined SOAS as reader in 1948. Von Führer-Hammendorf was professional anthropologist. He worked among the Konyak Naga and started the anthropology department in SOAS in London. He has numerous photographs, and his object collections are in Vienna and smaller collections in other places. Below, you can see the photographs of various. This is the Petrus Museum, where my arrow is. And this is the storage collection of Berlin Ethnologisch Museum. This is one of the panels in Petrus Museum which depicts a Naga heritage. But almost every display box in this museum has something from Naga communities. So it's a very significant collection. But also, these photographs were standard reading for those who have studied anthropology in the 1960s and 70s in European universities. So now there is a trajectory of his and history of collection. Some of the collection was bought, some was exchanged, but some, as we know, was also plundered. So we have the whole context of Naga as headhunting communities, the head trophies, but also there used to be slave trade, supposedly, and I think some Nagas have worked on this topic. But on one such punitive expedition, J.P. Mills took a whole column, and Führer Hammendorf, as an anthropologist, accompanied him and photographed the expedition. And the whole village of Pangsha was burnt. But before burning the village, heads were collected. The trophy heads were collected from the Morung, the particular youth dormitory. And we see the trajectory of plunder and punitive expedition. And here we have a particular display case in Peterburg's museum called the Treatment of the Dead Enemies, where there were several head trophies taken from different Naga communities. There are from Pangsha, the Kim Yungan, from Sumi, from Ao, Pom, Yachum, Yachumi, and Tangkhul area, and several others actually. And we see the accession register where it is entered. It says collected on the Pangsha expedition in November 1936. And here we have the photo documentation, which is available from the SOAS webpage, which has Führer Hammendorf's photographs available online. So there's the whole column. There you see the village being burnt, and these were the skulls in situ, how they were displayed in the village. Now, what are the other ways? What are the other things that were happening in the colonial time? There was also resistance. In one of the papers in the morning, they talked about Yadoyang. But Yadoyang's niece, Garden Liu, was arrested in 1932. Yadoyang himself was arrested and was hanged in 1931. But when Garden Liu was arrested, her notebooks, her clothes, her ornaments were confiscated, and they are now part of the Petervers Museum collection. Arkotong Longkumar has taken facsimils of the Garden Liu's notebooks where she used to scribble, because she was a charismatic leader as well, and a healer, plus a religious leader. So there are talks about repatriation, either digital repatriation or actual, that is, Arkotong is looking at it at present. Now, there was I have talked about 3 male anthropologists, but Ursula Graham Bauer has made a significant contribution. And mostly her photographs and films are there, and some objects are there. And very interestingly, the textiles that she has, one of the textiles, which you see, this one where my arrow is a Lungpense cloth from the Lotha community. And it was gifted to her by Khodao Yamthan when he came to London. So you also find in the collection an indication of the national movement and what kind of things were happening. Now we also have objects where we also get to know about the changing in thread, you know, what new material was coming in, and with the conversion to Christianity, what kind of new cloths were being woven. So we have those kind of things in the collection, but here I'm talking about a little different aspect. So what kind of regeneration of interest has taken place? Because these museum collections were made in 1890s, 1880s, and then until 1947. Um, so what about the intervening period? We know because of the political situation in Naga Hills, researchers were blocked for coming into the area. And also these objects kind of remained in the museum and not much was done because foreigners were not allowed till 2000. Before that, foreigners were allowed only as missionaries coming from the American Baptists or the Catholics who were coming in very, very different capacity. So we had Naga Video Disc project, which was done by Professor Alan McFarlane and his team in Cambridge. From that came out a book, which I think most of the Nagas know about it, Naga, the Hill People of Northeast India. They also did a small exhibition. And now the whole data that he has, um, uh, where he put all the unpublished works into a video disc, is online available from Cambridge University site. But there were some smaller exhibitions in between, but the major exhibitions came up in 2008. There was one by the University of Zurich called Schmuck and Ash, basically ornaments and ash. And that exhibited Naga objects from Vienna and Zurich. And the other exhibition where I was a co-curator was in Basel. These were complementary exhibitions. And that was called Naga, a forgotten mountain region rediscovered. And why that was so? Because Naga collections remained in the storage. Nobody was looking at them because nobody was going to the area. So that's why rediscovered. I mean, it's not that mountain region does not exist. And here we decided to invite, the whole exhibition was done in a certain way. You can see two photographs from the exhibition in the bottom left. Um, these were they were focused on objects. So what we did was that we put that economy is the basis, and on that is your feasting and whatever achievements. So whether the achievements are due to feast of merit, or is it in the war as bravery, all that has to have some kind of an economy that can hold that provides the subsistence to be able to do such things. And with that, also, we produced a book where we had invited Naga scholars to contribute. We also had Naga artists like Temsu Younger, whose installations were put in the museum exhibition. And then we had authors like Isterine Iralu and Temsula Ao coming and talking about their work. And we had Panos and several documentaries. So we had an ongoing program with a lot of scholars and activists from Naga community came over. Then again in 2017, 2018, during the 70 years of India's independence, Museum in Cambridge did a special exhibition called Another India, which focused on indigenous people. And one of the sections were devoted to Naga community. Now we see a permanent display in Horniman Museum in London was redone, and one gallery was devoted to their Naga collection. And we see here, I do not know whether you can see, for me, it is hidden by other people, but there is a sculpture which was made by Temsuyanga Longkumar, and that is now part of the permanent display in Horniman Museum. Now, what is happening in Europe? Now, let me come to Europe and Berlin. In Berlin, there is a whole movement of moving. Now, there's a whole movement about decolonization. The people are questioning the collections in ethnographic museums and other museums, saying, how have they come? What is the provenance of these collections? How they were collected? What is the history? And then At the same time, there is a whole movement to move certain objects from ethnographic and other collections into a central place called the Humboldt Forum. Now, within that, the Ethnological Museum, because it was part of the Basel exhibition when we did it, their new curator thought that okay, we have been told to make uh, certain labs, experimental exhibitions, and I will choose Naga. And he came to me saying, I want to make an exhibition on Naga headhunting. I said, well, it's a very cliche topic, but also interesting since you want to know how do people approach it within. So please go ahead. And I gave him my contacts, and Arko Long Kumar also helped him with his contacts. And so he presented here. You see Headhunter's Paradise, which is taken from a work by a Naga who calls Naga Hills as Headhunter's Paradise. And here he did experimental video. He traveled the area, he interviewed, and another person took the photographs. And these are the objects. Some of them were collected in 1880s, 1890s. So this was the experimental lab that was done. And based on that, it was selected that he could also do a larger exhibition for the Humboldt Forum. Now, how do you do an exhibition which is different from the others? And the only way I suggested that it could be different is that the main curator is somebody from the community. So, there again, who will shoulder the responsibility to speak for the community? Nobody is ready to do that. So, to resolve that, it's very interesting. How do we resolve it? We resolve it by interacting with the artist, and that is the best way. How do artists? So we have Zubeni, some of you might know her as a photographer. So here is Zubeni, and Zubeni is one of the artists who is interacting with the objects and how she sees this object collection, what kind of questions come in her mind. And for that, to that effect, we also had a meeting in 2015 where Panger, who's a faculty in OTS, and Zubedi, they came over and we had a very good discussion about the objects and travel, and how the objects have traveled all the way to European Museum and why has it happened. So it was a very interesting. Now, what are the other things happening? The other thing that is happening in museums is about decolonization and also questions about human remains. Some of the human remains have very significant value for the communities from where they have come and they have been returned in various parts of the world. But what about the museum? Now, during the COVID lockdown in UK, the museum that was having this conversation within itself as to what to do with the human remains. There were shrunken heads from one part of the world. There were trophies from Naga Hills. There were again head trophies from various African communities. So what the museum did was that till we actually know what to do with these human remains, we are going to remove them because in the end, it's a certain kind of culture and a certain kind of way of living of others that we are projecting. And this was on September 17th when they opened the museum for preview. This case with the head trophies is now like this. It is completely empty. All head trophies have been removed. Some Naga scholars have contacted the museum about, and they are probably are going to introduce this topic into the community as to what to do about the heads. Do we want to have them back, or do we want to have them remain with the museum? So, I mean, these are the questions that is for the community to handle. So, what about it? All these museums are doing things, but how do the community people from Naga Hills and various Naga communities engage with the collections? How many actually know about it? Scholars may know about it. There are a lot of Nagas in UK, but do they engage with the collections at all? Now, as a researcher, I took back photographs of textiles from Lotha Naga community to show them. That was in 2006. In 2010, I was asked to confirm whether all the textiles were actually Lotha. I said, well, I can only confirm from what is there in the catalogue. And the museum staff helped. And in 2010, the Renjin Women's Society produced a book and reproduced 32 textiles. And they had an exhibition during their Tokuemung festival in Woka. I'm told that there was a culture shock in Woka about the variety of textiles that were there. And what was the effect of this exhibition and book? 2 years later, we were contacted by the Sumi community, the Women's Association, and two members. I think everybody knows Keshali quite well. She was Naga. She's been very active in Naga Mothers Association. Keshali and Kitoli, who was the chairperson that time, they came over to Oxford and they looked at the Sumi Naga textiles. The museum made special arrangement for them because it was the first time anybody from Nagaland had actually come to look at their collection and study them. And they used the photographs. This is the interior of the book. You can see one of the textiles that we saw and how it is presented in the book with all the accession catalog information. And this is the book that was produced. And then we also have researchers who are entrepreneurs, but with research interest. And everybody, I think many people might know Pigeon. She's an entrepreneur, tea grower, coffee grower, and she also does homestays. But she has written a beautiful book on tattoos. And while she was in correspondence with us about and talking about the things and about the Naga video disc and the material in there, she also told me that there is one cloth I know my great grandmother had uh, woven, and it is there in the museum. And I was actually had goosebumps when I came across. I was looking at the cognac textiles, and I suddenly read a label where her great grandfather's name was there, and it was said that so and so's wife has done. And she came in 2018, and these are the cloths. These are the waist cloths from her village, Xiong, and this particular one closer to the edge is the one that was woven by her great grandmother. And here is her great grandfather's photograph. His name was Ahon. He was a GB and from Konyak community, from Xiong village. And he was also a great helper and friend to Heimendorf, to J.H. Hutton, to J.P. Mills. So that is the circuit, how it closes. That, you find actually a living descendant of the person who is mentioned in the archives, whose photographs are there in the archives, and there are cloths from her village, one of them actually woven by her great grandmother. So these are the kind of things, recirculating. I'm just coming to the end of my presentation. This is the last slide of mine. So the dialogue is continuing. And last year I was in Mokokchung, and though there was a researcher from Germany who had done a whole thesis on our Naga cloths, and she had also met some of them, but somehow there was a lack of translation or transmission. I came to know that the Ao Naga Watsu Mungdang was actually collecting all the material to produce a book and do an exhibition of um, uh, the designs of all the clothing. And they have done, their research is almost finished. And when I asked them about that researcher's work, they said, no, it's not of much use because our approach is totally different. Then I said, do you want are you interested in the older cloths? They said, what older cloths? I said, yeah, but we didn't know that there were physically existing older cloths in all these museum collections. So I sat down, this is my computer, I sat down, I showed them everything. And then they said, yes, they would like to exhibit the photographs and they would like to get all the information. So we have old photographs in Peterwas Museum, as well as cloths in Berlin and Peterwas Museum. And Peterwas Museum would be sending them. Because of COVID, everything has come to a standstill, but we are hoping that the exhibition will be shown next year. And I'm finished. I can answer questions later on. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshi. And our next speaker is continuing this conversation.
Sorry, I need to make sure that I'm not sharing my screen anymore. So.
Oh, okay.
I do not know how to stop share. Oh, there it is. I can see it now. Thank you. I don't know. I just kind of hurtled past and I hope I didn't take into other people's time.
No. Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation talk, and I'm excited that the next paper continues this conversation about shawls. So our next speaker is Erwin L. Nam Odio with the paper Geographical Indications, Protecting the Heritage of Nagaland's Chakhesang Tribe.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Naga Scholars Association, for this opportunity, for being able to be here today to present this paper itself is a very huge thing. So I'll just try to share my screen too. And this is what my interest and what I'm planning to talk about basically is this photograph that we have right in front of us, which is depicting the two shawls that belongs to the Chakhesang tribe. And the most important thing that came to me when I saw this and when the article came out, in fact, it was an article that was about the misrepresentation case that came up and that was done in Nagaland, first of all. But from there onwards, then you start reading about it and you get to know that these shawls have a GI tag to them. Now, although I've put up these two shawls right in front of us, today my paper is actually on what a GI is, that is a geographical indication, and what is the nature of geographical indication when we are talking about intellectual property rights. And I'm sure many of us already know that today these two shawls, they are now being there is an objection from the Chakhesang Women's Welfare Society because of a particular display of these shawls in the Surajkund International Fair that took place in February. And there is a misrepresentation in the sense that because the Rira shawl that we have on the left is worn by the males and the Rura shawls is a female version of the Rira. So apparently at the fashion show, there is a misrepresentation in as much as the Rira were worn by females and the Rura were worn by males. So there's a case that is pending. There's a case that has been filed in the district court of Pek district, and now it was filed in it was admitted in the court in the month of September. But we are just trying to find out actually what is the applicability of GI and how far can the community heritage be protected, because this is an area that is of interest to me as well, because I have been doing a study on the research on the expressions that we call our traditional cultural expressions that talk about the culture of the people, the folklore of the people, how through these we get our designs and the art and the craft that comes out of those. So GI, when we talk about geographical indication, I'll just go straight ahead. It says, we know that the term itself is very clear. It is an indication which identifies goods because it is originating from a particular geographical region. And it is because of its origination from a geographical region that it has some special characteristics. It has a reputation and a quality that is linked to its place of origin. Now, this is very important regarding the special characteristics. The next thing is the reputation, because from the characteristics, how is the reputation built? And then moving from there, the quality. Now, GI, basically, when we talk about GI, we know that this is an intellectual property right. And you can say that this is one of the best ways of protecting community heritage, in fact, because if we look into intellectual property rights, it basically has to do with the right that a particular author has, originally, and it has to be an original creation. So there are many things, but since I'm only going to be sticking to GI, I'm just going to talk about why it is so important that we know about this law, especially in indigenous peoples and traditional communities, why this law is so helpful and how can we build upon it so that we can promote our goods, we can promote these indigenous goods which will have significance and meaning, and then it will also have a reputation in the coming days, so that not only will it be recognized. So first, let's say that it dates back to 1919. This is when the law was first established. So it's come a long way, but currently, when you're talking about the international aspect of it, you have World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, and then you have the World Trade Organization, and the agreement that is related to intellectual property rights, agreement of trade related intellectual property rights, is basically the agreement that regulates and administers with regards to all these international treaties. Now, I'm briefly mentioning these treaties as well because they are talking about what are the standard measures that are there that exist internationally, and how can we become a part. And then if we have a GI in India, then does it mean that there is a national treatment of it? And then if you're a member of that convention, your goods have to be protected in the manner that you're protecting your own goods of that same category. So these agreements and these conventions, India is a party to them, but India is not yet a party to one convention, which is a very important one, that is known as the Lisbon Agreement. Now, the Lisbon Agreement basically allows you not only to register your goods, but then the name of the goods also. So once we are able to get that done, then it has a trademark related issue that comes in also, which is very important when it leads to GIs, because these two, geographical indication and trademarks, sometimes there is a sort of a clash between both of these intellectual property rights. As far as the Indian legislation is concerned, it was a result of the obligation that India made under TRIPS in 1999, and it became effective in the year 2002. Presently today, that is as on this month only, if you look at the GI website, the Indian website, there are 370 registered GIs so far. And you can see from here that there are 214 goods that are registered under handicrafts. Now, under GI, you can have goods that are natural goods, you can manufactured goods, agricultural goods as well. So majority right now, when we are looking at it, we find that out of 370, we have a major 214 that is solely on handicrafts. And this one particular reason about this is also because the government has been very proactive towards promoting textiles, handlooms, this particular area. And that is why we are now seeing that there is a lot of registration with respect to these goods also. So the question of how do we build it up, and how are we supposed to basically have the kind of goods that we are talking about today, the textile aspect of it also, because the shawls, because not many traditional shawls or traditional cloths have been given a GI tag so far. Just recently, the Mizo people, the Mizoram had received a GI tag on five of its traditional cloth, the famous traditional cloth that they use, so that they received it in August of 2019. But just getting a tag, is that sufficient for us to get our products or our heritage that we are very proud of and that we really cherish? Is it enough to get it protected under the GI Act, is what we really want to discuss today. So when we look at the rationale of the GI, basically it is based on collective traditions and decision making process. So it's community based, and it also rewards traditions, while it also gives space for continued evolution as well. It has a very important emphasis on the relationship between human efforts, culture, the land resources, and the environment that it is in, because we are talking about not only that that particular good is originating from that place, but we are talking about the special characteristics because of which that good has. So we have so many examples which we will be also discussing, and they are not freely transferable from one owner to another as well. So if it belongs to you, if it has been registered to that particular owner, then it continues to belong to that person. Now, the advantage being, one of the greatest advantage is to increase producers' income, preventing the misappropriation of protected goods. So you already have a good that is protected. through GI, you can always find out that it is not misappropriated. Like, people are not misusing it, because that's one of the ways that there can be an infringement under the GI Act as well. Then this is one of the best way of protecting traditional knowledge. Then it also enhances rural development. Now, when we look at the Act, the first and foremost thing that we always find important about is giving legal validity, or an evidence that it is strong, that it is going to be protected and no one can cause harm to it, is when we talk about the registration aspect of it. Now, when we talk about registration can be done by any association of persons. It can be by the producers themselves, or it can be by any organization or authority. But the most important thing is, this organization authority is representing the interests of the producers of the concerned goods that we are looking at. This is given in section 11. Then you have section 17, wherein you can, if you are a producer, not only like a person, like a society who is the registered proprietor for the purpose of getting the GI registered. If you are a producer and you are the one who is producing such things, you yourself can apply and register to be a proprietor as well. And once you do that, you can either do it by forming an association also, which is given under section 17. But this particular section, even today, even the ones which are very old GIs, where GI tags have been given in India, I'm talking about, many producers and many people who are producers of that particular good are not very aware that this is possible for them, that they can become the registered proprietors as well. Then you can, when you are the registered proprietor, you have the exclusive right to use the GI. Then the term of protection under GI is 10 years. And although registration is not necessary, but registration becomes a prima facie proof of validity of the goods. So it is important to get it registered. And once you register, once you register it, that is when you are able to use the other provisions in the Act whenever there is an infringement. Now, infringement is something where we say that whenever somebody has made use of that particular good in a manner which is misleading. Now, there are three types of infringement that you find in section 22 of the Geographical Indications Act. Now, the first thing is when there's a misleading regarding the presentation of the goods, regarding from its origin itself. You're misleading it by presenting it in that way. And then when somebody who is not an authorized user uses the GI in a manner that constitutes an act of unfair competition. And unfair competition talks about in the manner of the trade that we are going through, how far along are we misrepresenting it, so that it is not, we are misrepresenting it regarding its characteristics, regarding the use of it, regarding why it is important for us, then falsifying basically the product. So infringement section is section 22. So I'm just going very fast, I know, but now coming to the case of the Chakhesang shawls. Now this is, the shawls have been registered, they have received the GI tag, they had made an application in 2015. They are the CWWS, that is the Chakhesang Women's Welfare Society, is the registered proprietor for the purpose of the GI Act, because they are the authorized users, because it has been registered in their name. Then, therefore, when we look at it from that point of view, it is very clear that CWWS is equipped to deal with the infringement of the shawls, that is Rira and Rura, on the ground of unfair trade competition. Now, unfair trade competition has been given, and it has been explained in section 22 explanation 1 and 2, where I am just going to read it out, where I've put it here, and it says unfair trade competition is defined as to include any use of GI which in the course of trade is liable to mislead the persons as to the nature, the manufacturing process, the characteristics, the suitability for their purpose, and the quantity of the goods. Now, as soon as you are applying for a GI, there is a requirement for the the registered proprietor to make specifications on what is the nature of the good. Why is it considered to be unique? Why is it, what are the characteristics that says that it comes only from this place? So for this reason, you need to put in documents, you need to have a history of how these shawls have been brought in. And that is basically how the registrar also allows the registration, and it is basically given registration, and a GI tag is given to them. So in considering what has been mentioned in the statement of specifications also, they have said that it is unique to the Chakhesang tribe only, and because it has a uniqueness because of the way that it has a connection with their culture, and this is their expression of culture which has been with them for many years, and it was on that ground alone that it was also given a GI tag. But now the next question is this GI tag enough for us to say that they will always be given protection under it? Although now they have a very valid case, now the question here is there was no licensing as such, but they had given legal rights over to Trifid and the fashion designer who was entrusted with these shawls to present it at that fashion show. Now the question is, once it goes to these persons, once a product has been lawfully acquired, now assuming that it has been lawfully acquired by Ritu Berry and the Trifid, because Trifid is a government body, then they might have entered into an agreement. That's why she was allowed to show those shawls. So since I don't know the entire story, but then as far as the writings that I have seen in the public domain, it has been mentioned that there was this fashion show where they had these shawls, Ritu Berry and Trifid had displayed these shawls, but there was a misrepresentation on the displacement of it. Now, once a product, however, in section 22, subsection 4 of the GI Act, it says, once a product has been lawfully acquired, further dealings in the goods are not considered infringement. But what will be called and what will be termed as further dealings, even in case laws in India, we don't have many litigations pertaining to GIs. So how will the court look at it from the purview of these shawls that are now they have now been produced before the court? We are yet to know, and we are yet to see. And we must also understand that GI cases, whenever there is an infringement, there is generally, in most cases, there is generally an out of court settlement. So like I said, the case was admitted in the district court in September. Now, a few 1-2 months have lapsed from there, and I am not very sure about the progress of the case. But if there is going to be any sort of both the parties coming together, they could probably discuss out of court, and maybe the dispute may be settled in that manner. But if we say that let's say that the case continues, now the question is the interpretation of the expression further dealings. How will the further dealings be dealt with? Because we don't have many case laws that talks about it. And thus further dealing means that just because the tribe has allowed Ritu Berry and Trifid to use it, were they at liberty to misrepresent it because it is assumed, let's say, that they would have known that these shawls had a very huge impact in the culture, and then it had a lot of meaning for the people of this tribe. So if that is the case, then can we say that the further dealings, if the lawful acquiring aspect of it, just the fact that they were using it, will that be considered lawful acquiring? And then once they have acquired in that manner, the further dealings, whatever they did with it, can we say that cannot be considered as infringement? So these are the things that matter when we are looking at the GI Act with particular reference to the shawls that we are talking about. So it's a very good case that we can reflect upon and continue to follow on it and see what happens. But why this thing has become very important for me, and why I have decided to present a paper on this, is because today, as traditional communities, we are slowly developing, And we are in a position now where we are able to display all our goods. And now you might have seen during COVID time, our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, using the scarf, and then there were many articles on it, and some stating that the Modi scarf or the Modi gamacha, and basically that is a Manipuri, the Meiteis call it Leirampi. So this Leirampi, they use it on very, very specific important occasions, and it is very important to them. Now, this Leirampi, if at all they had already acquired a GI on it, they could have proceeded against against whatever misappropriation had happened. But for some in the news also, if you read them, many have mentioned about how it is a sort of a way of connecting with the people of the Northeast, and then how he is displaying our attire, etc. But the next step, him using it, is a different thing. But the next step was that in UP, there was a mass production of these scarves, which were exclusively belonging to the Manipuris or the Meiteis, and they considered it very, very important for their culture, and it was in fact hand woven. Now, when they become woven by machines, and the weavers in UP were selling it at a very minimal rate as well. So this hurt the sentiments of the people also, and they have, right after that only, they have decided to now file for a GI tag, and they have put in an application now only. So this is how we are when we are talking about certain tribes or people in our areas, how we are not aware of the laws that are there. But today, not only is this might be the only law that we talk about which is able to take into interest our interests as people's tribal people, because it protects the community. Now, the other IPRs, however, does not protect the community. And that is why today, some of us, we blindly say, if we have this, why don't we just patent it? Patent is an invention. Patent is not something that has been in the community for ages. It has to be novel. There has to be a novelty factor that comes to it. And as an exception also, you have section 3P, which says that there can be no patenting of traditional knowledge goods. So that provision is also already there. So in under IPR, this is one area wherein, as a community, we can protect our textiles, if of which we are putting out in the public domain, because nowadays we are also talking about cultural appropriation, where the cultural heritage of minorities are being appropriated by the people who are more advanced than us. So many, we are looking ahead, Latin America, indigenous peoples are all waking up, and then now we are also in India, we as tribals are also, we do know that there's a law, but we don't know the extent of how it protects us. So this is a very good case that we can follow up and see what happens in the court, so we can find out as to whether the protection that we can get through geographical indication of the shawls that we are talking about, or other handicrafts, whatever it may be, that we intend to protect. What is the status with others? I don't know, because I believe we have just heard from Professor Vibha Joshi, who has told us already about the kind of culture, the culture richness that the Nagaland has, the textiles that are there in museums, etc. And that is very, very, such a very, very interesting topic that we have just heard. On the other hand, these are the things that we now have, and what we have today, which is in also, like, if it goes to the public domain, if we don't have it registered, then there is no way of protecting them. All we can say is, just like the Leiram fee case, all we can ask is the ministry or the Ministry of Textiles to seek forgiveness to the government of Manipur. That is the only such things that we can do, because we don't have any other way to do it. So I'm very glad that I have many examples that I wanted to show, but I will not go there. But slight suggestion, first and foremost, is, let's remember, this is for promoting awareness amongst producers. It is supposed to benefit the producers, but today in India, it is more like a top-down process. So the government is the one who represents the producers, and the producers don't know anything about the law. There are many famous GI tags that we have in India since 2007. The mirrors from Kannada, all this from Kerala, etc. The Kanchipuram saris. But what we don't know is that they are actually, the producers themselves don't form any associations. They don't even know that they can be registered as authorized users or proprietors. Then involving the stakeholders is very important. But right after that, once you have a GI tag, the next very important thing is quality control. If we have a GI tag now, like the Chakhesang shawl has a GI tag, or the Mizo traditional cloths have been given a GI tag, how do we promote it? Brand building, logo creation, that becomes important, because we need to build a reputation, because it is only through reputation that the consumers will know the quality of these things, and then they will respect it and honor it the same way we do. So thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity. And yeah, I'll just end now and I'll just stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next talk is from Relo Kenye. The paper is called Cultural Anxiety in Contemporary Naga Society, Production, Performance, and Representation of Naga Folk Fusion Music.
Well, thank you. And thank you, NSA, for this time. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so my paper is slightly longish, so I shall be just reading out. Besides the focus on its troubled political history with the Indian state, can it be held from a certain perspective that contemporary discourses on Naga society and identity have largely been fixated around the historical epochs of Western colonization and Christianization? Subsequently, can it be viewed that scholars, Nagas in particular, have been engaged in critiquing and quote-unquote correcting colonial constructs of the Nagas as a people, and on the impact that these historical processes have rendered on the Nagas? And along these lines, does such a position then imply that the Naga past and tradition would have remained unscathed had it not been for the colonial and missionary intrusions and disruptions of the same? If so, can the realization and manifestation of a revitalized traditional way of life or culture in the present remain insulated from the impact of the contemporary realities of globalization and multiculturalism? While I do not in any way seek to suggest that such a framework in which these questions emerges is therefore unfeasible, they are raised from the perspective that there is a seeming disjuncture, a lacuna between the complex web of the current state of affairs in Naga society on the one hand, and the manner in which existing frames of modes or quote unquote representing and imagining history and culture are manifested on the other. By this, I mean to imply that attempts at asserting or reinforcing Naga identity and unique history from the tradition modernity exists is often deeply entrenched in what I shall call a romanticized past, a nuanced but often at times lopsided revivalist approach of reading culture, customary laws, practices, and tradition, etc. As a result of which, the same discursive processes tend to exhibit a lack in indulging present-day realities and shared lived experiences. By emphasizing on the facet of disjuncture that I've proposed here, this paper shall attempt to highlight that there is a need to revisit and critically examine the existing and quote-unquote normative modes of discursive practices on the Nagas by conceptualizing a notion of cultural anxiety in context. Simply put, and as it can be inferred by now, by cultural anxiety, I refer to the collective sense of unease and concern among the Nagas over the ways in which culture and tradition in the Naga milieu has transitioned or evolved over the course of time. It is anxiety over the loss of traditional culture, a tension between nostalgia and present state of affairs. It is a comprehensive term that bear implications to the Naga perception of themselves as a collective, as indigenous people caught up in the quagmire of cultural change. In that sense, the idea of cultural anxiety is inherently linked with the larger question of identity, Naga identity in this context. In this paper, I shall elaborate on this idea of cultural anxiety by dwelling on the specific field of music as a cultural practice. The field of music provides an ideal domain to discuss and understand the notion of cultural anxiety in context, because in short, music in the Naga milieu is a cultural practice where both notions of tradition and the modern are played out, the two primary categories around which the idea of cultural anxiety is built. The particular genre of music that I shall be dwelling on this is that of folk fusion, and the singers of this style of music that shall be looked at include Ruben Mashangva, Tesio Sisters, and Abai Genesis. Let me quickly share an image of these musicians. So to most Nagas and some others, these musicians are but familiar names. Ruben Mashangva, also called Guru Ruben Mashangva, or father of the Naga folk blues, is a Tangkhul Naga folk musician based in Imphal, Manipur. Tesio sisters are a quartet of siblings who sing mostly Chakhesang traditional songs in the Chokri dialect, and Abayagenesis are a folk rock fusion band from Dimapur who have developed a form of world music which they call Hawi music. Thus, drawing on what this paper seeks to achieve, the following sections shall critically examine a number of interrelated questions on form, content, and platforms around the production, performance, circulation, and reception of the works of these musicians, and how they represent or are represented as Naga musicians. First, given the experimental genre of fusion music that they produce, an evident question that emerges is, can fusion be treated as Naga folk music? If it is so, what are the reasons? Or if it is not, what are the reasons as well? These are questions that entail anxiety. Though many of them are written in the Tangkhul dialect, most of Mashangva's songs are characterized by a blend of traditional folk tunes and blues, largely in the tradition of Bob Dylan's blues style. His songs like Hopipi Le Hole and Changkum Pilaver carry traditional tunes but are braided by beats and rhythms that are predominantly quote unquote Western. Or, for instance, Abayogenesis in their latest song titled Up on the Mountains. This song is characterized by a combination of folk tune and rock style instrumentation, accompanied by electric and bass guitars, mouth organ, and drums. They also have almost all of these songs written in the English language. Whereas Tesio Sisters, for instance, have also experimented with electronic dance music, among other forms, in songs like Ho Rassi and Hiyo, produced in 2018 and 2019 respectively. Thus, if one situates these observations within the existing frameworks of the predominantly revivalist narrative that I have elaborated earlier, it is evident that it becomes difficult to frame these experiments or creative processes of fusion music within the conventional categorization of folk music. And therefore, in short, such a scenario results in what I have termed cultural anxiety. In a documentary titled Songs of the Blue Hills, produced by National Award-winning filmmaker Utpal Bor Pujari, an Au elder and folk artist by the name Benang Younger Jamir states that what Abayogenesis sings as folk music is not pure folk music. He goes on to add that the music they produce is but their own creation and therefore is not quote unquote real Naga music. Whereas, on the other hand, in an interview with the Grey Valley, a magazine, Moasubong of Abayogenesis states, and I quote, the present youngsters in Nagaland are more inclined to Western music, and in turn, our culture has unfortunately become more or, of lifeless to them, and as such, they have less or no knowledge of our rich cultural heritage. We thought we should reverse these trends through our music. So we have incorporated the elements of the past with our music to make it modern and appealing so that it would arouse interest to them, unquote. Thus, among other plausible inferences, in these two statements, we observe a scenario where the same objective, that is, of reviving and sustaining traditional Naga ethos through music, is confronted by the temporal and intricate question of whether folk music is supposed to be, quote unquote, recreated. Go to the next section. This is titled On the Semantics of Folk Music and Cultural Anxiety. Closely related to and following what is being discussed thus far, a second aspect that I shall look at here is on the question of content and meaning of folk fusion music. That is, the subject of content in fusion music necessitates interrogation in terms of whether these singers should stringently confine the semantics of their songs to themes around Naga folk tradition and culture, so as to be categorized as representatives of Naga folk music or identity. If their works are called fusion music because they blend folk style with other forms of music, particularly Western, do they also venture beyond themes that are rooted in a traditional past to include themes that are historical as well as contemporary in nature? And they actually do. For instance, both Ruben Mashangva and Abayagenesis have addressed the vexed and violent history of Indo-Naga political conflict and internal strife among the Nagas in their songs No More Killings and Saramati Tears, respectively. Some lines from Mashangva's song reads, Let there be no more killings, no more killings. Time calls at last to reconcile. Of guns and bombs we have no need, no need. Beneath our flags, we plant the seed of friendship. Let killings cease, let killings cease. Our creed is reconciliation. Actually, the song was actually written by Dr. Wati Iyer and sung by Ruben. Similarly, in Saramati Tears, braided with a rather melancholic tone, Abayagenesis presents an imagery of Saramati Peak looking down in pain on the Naga country over violence and bloodshed among the people. The song calls for an end to it. Thus, what I'm trying to point out here is that if one were to restrict the content of folk music to that which belongs to the traditional cultural ethos of the past, it will be but impossible to include and express a pertinent issue like the subject of Naga political history into such a quote-unquote static definition of folk music. It is clear that contemporary realities that affect and shape the understanding of Naga identity will remain detached from being articulated as long as such purist notions of folk music continues to be endorsed. This, in short, results in cultural anxiety. Further, in the case of the Tetsio sisters, one can observe that most of their songs, besides covers and collaborations, are drawn from Lee or the Chokri traditional folk songs of the Chakhesang tribe. No doubt, their songs like Tsakatiyo, which is basically a work song, and Chepo Chelo Lizo, which is about unrequited love, are but common themes that are found in folk songs of the other Naga tribes as well, thereby underscoring the facade of thematic commonality and hence reinforcing cultural affinity and a common thread for the assertion of a collective identity among Naga tribes. However, to stretch the analysis further, and to critically read these examples from a strictly context-specific lens, can such songs that are drawn from a particular linguistic or tribal milieu be treated as a cultural form that is representative of the larger Naga collective? I hold that it is only by reinterpreting and relocating them in the broader socio-political framework and network of modern Naga identity formation that they can be treated as articulating the wider idea of Naga folk music and hence identity. And coming to the third and final section, titled The Politics of Representation and Cultural Anxiety. The third and final question that I shall look at is with regard to the issue of platforms in which they are represented, received, and imagined. Irrespective of the dialect or language and other stylistic features of folk music that they draw from their respective tribes and communitarian milieu, these singers have gone on to become representatives of a larger notion of Naga identity to audiences outside the local music circuit, mainly through the agency of media narratives about them, as well as through their tours and performances outside the local Naga music circuit. They are known as Naga musicians and not as a Tangkhul folk singer, nor as a group of sisters from the Chakhesang tribe, nor as a contemporary fusion band consisting of all musicians. For instance, Ruben Mashangva is known by a series of names like Father of Naga Folk Blues, King of Naga Folk Blues, and even by the name Bob Dylan of the Nagas. Perhaps they are monikers or nicknames given to him by his fans over the years, but these same names have been popularized and have also been used by national media houses, newspapers, and magazines in particular to represent him as a singer from the Naga community and thereby also constructing him as a cultural figure of the Nagas. For example, the Indian Express, dated October 5, 2014, carried an article on Mashingva titled Hooked on a Feeling, the king of Naga folk blues, talks about folk music in today's context. Likewise, a Business Standard, another paper, on September 25, 2014, featured the Tetsio sisters in an article titled Tetsio Sisters from Nagaland Popularized Naga Folk Music. Thus, while such representations, by using the term Naga, actually underscore and only reinforce the imagination and consolidation of a modern collective Naga identity, what I seek to highlight here is that if one were to place such contemporary categories of representation within the locus of the traditionalist revivalist framework again, it is evident that it becomes difficult to treat them as actual representatives of traditional Naga folk music. For from such a perspective, the actual representatives would be those who would adhere to and perform the more quote-unquote authentic and context-specific forms of folk music of each village or tribal community. For example, if one were celebrating a traditional festival in a village like the Luira festival, which is the seed sowing festival of the Tangkul Nagas, or Muatse, which is also the seed sowing festival of the Aus, it is only plausible to infer that folk singers who would reproduce or sing in the actual tradition of these respective festivals would be given the platform rather than Mashangva or Abai Genesis, whose songs are more experimental and contemporary in nature. Nonetheless, on the other hand, these same musicians hold a crucial role and place in representing what I shall call the essence of Naga folk music and tradition to audiences outside, given the fair degree of exposure and network they have built over the years. That even if certain traditionalists seek to dismiss their music, at the moment it is only musicians like them who have largely been able to create a sort of niche for Naga music in a global, popular, multicultural digital space, and thereby its role in the assertion of identity and Naga traditional ethos. Folk music that is primarily rooted within the local community has its own limits in terms of achieving such digital access and circulation. These are contemporary factors and realities that cannot be avoided. Therefore, what we observe is that there is a desire for the articulation and assertion on the one hand, and anxiety over the use of a reconfigured form of traditional folk music on the other hand. Cultural anxiety in this regard veers beyond the temporal question of the then and the now to a special dimension of platforms within and outside the local music and cultural circuits. Conclusion towards reconfiguring Naga culture and identity. While I have focused on the cultural practice of music in this paper, the question of cultural anxiety in contemporary Naga society is but a comprehensive subject that traverses beyond the field of music. It is evident that there are other domains where this facet of anxiety is played out. For instance, like in the case of language, there is anxiety over the overwhelming spread of Nagamis or use of the English language in relation to the gradual dwindling of respective tribal languages or dialects. Anxiety can also be read around the question of the use and relevance of customary laws in the present, etc. Hence, this paper is but a preliminary attempt in this direction and calls for more and in-depth examination in these other domains as well. As I conclude the paper, I would like to reiterate that in engaging with a critical interrogation of the select musicians and their works, it has not been my intent to take anything away from the works and songs they have produced and performed thus far. Rather, in the midst of the nuances and intricacies involved around the production and circulation of their works, I hold that they are but agencies that reinforce the view of music as a creative process of culture. On other hand, by invoking the view that existing discourses on Naga culture and people continues to be largely driven by a somewhat overt emphasis on a nostalgic idea of tradition that is isolated in a glorified past, I do not in any way undermine the crucial significance and implications of the rich gamut of Naga cultural practices and traditional ethos. However, what this paper has attempted to highlight through the discussion and analysis made thus far is that in this regard, there is an undeniable presence and a palpable sense of cultural anxiety across various sections of the Naga populace in the present times. And hence, there is a need to revisit and critically rethink on the whole idea of culture and tradition in context. It is a move towards critical collective self-examination. In reading the subject of culture, tradition, and identity, contemporary Naga studies and Nagas in the 21st century should therefore continue to, but also move beyond existing post-colonial frameworks to engage with new terrains and developments of a globalized multicultural present that have become part of the complex web of what forms the present-day Naga society. And if need be, there must be a way forward in reconfiguring perspectives of these subjects without losing the very essence of what makes Nagas Nagas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our fourth and final presentation is by Keniseno Nihu and Dr. Kanato Chopi, and the paper is titled The Battle of Kohima and the Making of Modern Naga Society.
Okay, hello, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Naga Scholars Association, for this opportunity, and thank you, Chairperson, for the time allotted. So our paper, as mentioned, is titled The Battle of Kohima and the Making of Modern Naga Society. Due to time constraint, I will not discuss in detail about the Second World War and the Battle of Kohima in detail, but quickly read out the impact of the war on the Naga society. So with the hope that I will be able to stick with the time allotted. The Second World War marked the beginning of a new chapter of the so-called impenetrable Naga Hills. Despite the destruction, the wartime developments in particular boosted the development of Naga society. By 1942, the Burma Road was cut off, and since the Americans had established a bomber road in China, supplies were carried out over the southern spurs of the Himalayas called the Ham. The Americans wanted to strengthen supplies to China, not only through airlift, but also by land. The press, as a matter of the highest urgency and importance, the making of a modern motor road from the existing roadhead at Lido through 500 miles of jungles and mountains into Chinese territory. In order to recapture Burma, it became important to widen the Burma Road. The Bokachan Road was started at the end of 1942. 200 miles of motor roads and tracks were added to the existing one. The roads led to the expansion of administration in the hitherto unadministered areas. And so in 1948, a separate Tuinsang administrative center was created. And in 1957, Tuinsang was bifurcated from Nefa and became a district of Nagaland. The Naga Labor Corps were deployed in the road expansion projects. The jeep track to Peg was proposed in September 1942 and started at the end of 1942 was soon widened to a width of 8 feet. Later, it was to be made impossible for 1500 weight to 44th mile. A link track was to be made from there to Jesami and a bridle path to Kangjang. The Chizami branch road, about 7 miles inland, was also completed. In the monsoon of 1943, a labor corps of Semas, Aus, Sangtams, and Lotas, numbering 500, were engaged to keep open the main road. They worked for 3 months, July to September inclusive. The Second World War truly facilitated the connectivity, both internal and external, which further boosted trading in the Naga Hills. Prior to the war, the Northeast Railways was not a major concern for the British Empire, but under the Burma campaign, the Northeast Railway and Dimapur in particular became critical to the success of the Allied force, as Dimapur was the main supply depot. Wartime expediency, investment, and ingenuity increased rail tonnage from around 600 tons a day to over 7,300 by January 1946. In early 1944, the American Army provided 6 battalions of dedicated railway troops, about 4,700 men. Interestingly, the only airport in Nagaland at Dimapur was also a making of the Second World War. The war broke down the barriers of isolation through the improvement of connectivity. The inflow of money during the war was tremendous. the standard of living of the Nagas in ease and comfort became higher than the other tribes of Assam on receipt of higher wages or earnings and in the purchase of indigenous products by the Japanese and allied troops in cash and compensation for their services. To reconstruct the ruins of the war and provide relief measures both for the people of the Naga Hills district of Assam and the Manipur state, the Assam Relief Measures was formed in May 1944. And a large military hospital was set up at Kefraja, Kigwema, at the present site of Jaffa Christian College to deal with emergency cases, especially for the southern Angami villages. With the departure of the Japanese and the establishment of the Assam Relief Measures, depots were rapidly opened at different places, clerks appointed and the issue of food began. Rice and paddy were obtained through the Assam government agents, Messrs. Steel Brothers in the Assam Valley and from the Surma Valley through the Food Grains Syndicate, the Eastern Bengal and Assam Commercial Syndicate through the Supply Department. All affected villages had to be provided with food to carry them up for the harvest of 1945, a weekly scale of 5 seers of rice per adult and 2.5 seers per child was adopted by the government. Other food commodities were supplied, which comprised of salt, sugar, jaggery, flour, and dal. Agricultural implements and aluminium were supplied from Kolkata. It was decided in consultation with the Deputy Commissioner of Naga Hills that the maximum issue of 2 dhows, 2 axes, 2 hoes, and 1 plowshare was sufficient to enable each householder to resume normal life and do his cultivation. Besides commodities like blankets, yarns for weaving, cooking pots, mugs, plates, and winnowing trays were provided. In the Naga Hills, 2,780 houses were destroyed as a result of the war. As compensation, the government paid a sum of rupees 200 in cash plus a sum of rupees 200 in saving certificate for each house's destroyed. The British gifted a 200-bedded hospital to the Nagas at an approximate cost of rupees 15 lakhs, which was christened Naga Hospital Kohima. This indeed led to the expansion and standardization of modern health services. A group of sisters and a Catholic priest arrived Kohima in December 1947 to offer their services in the newly established Naga Hospital at the request of Sir Akbar Haidari. When the sisters had to leave the hospital in 1955, Father A. Marachino was allowed to stay in Kohima. He paved the way for the growth of the Catholic Church in the Angami areas. The Catholic Church made its presence in the Lota area in 1952. Thus, the war gift, besides from uplifting the medical services, also introduced the Catholic denomination to the Naga Hills, where hitherto the American Baptist missionaries had established their faith. The Kohima Cathedral, situated at Aradura, was mostly funded by the Japanese who wished to construct a monument to commemorate the brave soldiers who died in the Battle of Kohima. The nursing profession among Naga women soon became one of the sought-after profession, while among men, many were recruited in the 2nd Battalion of Assam Regiment, raised in 1942 and consisted of Naga soldiers. Even laborers got new ideas by coming into contact with the technological operations. After the war, electric power projects and piped water supply were started. J.H. Hutton, while addressing a conference on the reconstruction in the Naga Hills after the war, commented, quote, "For there has been an insistent demand for education. The district has for many years asked for its own high school or even some center of still more advanced teaching than that. This demand of education is one which cannot be denied if anything is to be granted at all. Therefore, when peace returned, some renowned persons from the southern Angami villages convened a meeting of the elders and resolved that they should unite and work for the welfare of the region, and thus was born the Southern Angami Council. The council proposed to establish a school, and John Angami, a successful contractor during the war, volunteered to provide the financial aid, and therefore the school was named after him. Established in 1945, today the institution is known as John Higher Secondary School at Wiswema, Kohima. Another initiative under the council was to provide electricity in the region. A hydroelectric power station was set up at Kehora, the major river between Jakhama and Wiswema, and provided electricity in the villages of Wiswema, Jakhama, and Kigwema for about 3 years. Charles Pause, the last Deputy Commissioner of Naga Hills in April 1948, established the Naga Hills District Tribal Council to unite and bring all the Nagas under one administrative rule and to reconstruct the war-devastated areas. In February 1946, this organization was re-established into a political platform called the Naga National Council, which spearheaded the cause of the Naga freedom movement. It was the element of the World War II that had reactivated the cause into new dimension with new ideas, approaches, and techniques. The World War II had for the first time shown the Nagas the way of imperialistic struggle for power and supremacy with arms. It at the same time had disclosed to them the know-how of sophisticated weapons through training and recruiting to fight in the war. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, in the interest of our timing of this session, I know that a lot of you have had a long day. Instead of giving extensive comments of my own, I want to pose a few questions adapted from the chat from all of you. So what I would like to ask is I'll pose like maybe 3 questions and then invite each of the speakers to respond. And I'll ask you to keep your responses pretty brief, 1 to 2 minutes each. And you can kind of pick and choose what questions you want to respond, or if you want to kind of respond to them more generally. So one question from the chat is, how can we make sure that Indigenous knowledge systems are not exploited and misappropriated? And another question, do new songs become part of the folk tradition? And I think maybe we could extend that question to also thinking about shawls. And then another kind of more generally, there in the chat, there's been discussion about sort of these ideas of anguish and anxiety around Indigenous knowledge systems and where they appear and sort of the politics of those. So I'd like to invite any of our 4 wonderful panelists to respond to these questions in 1 to 2 minutes each.
All right. I think Vibha ma'am would have, but I will just respond to the first one regarding the misapproach. Audible now? Yeah, thanks. Misappropriation, because as far as the status of this particular topic is concerned, there is a worldwide talk on it also right now. And there is no law as such to protect it, because we're talking about different people coming from different continents, having different habits, culture, because we can't say that all indigenous peoples have the same culture, have the same habits. It's very distinct to where they are coming from. So my research actually was on like regional treaties, whether we will have regional treaties, whether with the copyright would be the best protection, whether it would be a sui generis law, for example, if we are talking about specific people. So far till today, like in the answers that we have seen in the chat box, I think Gamshimre is also one person who knows a lot on this, because he deals with that. And I believe that that is one of the things he has spoken about as well. And sui generis that we speak about, because what is the best thing for this particular people. Like in India, it's diverse. We have so many tribes, but what will be applicable to the tribals in the Northeast is not going to be applicable to the tribals in Orissa. So how do we come together, and how do we, bring up a law that will be for all of the tribals together? So that is the basic question that everyone is trying to look into. But right now, what is so important is, I think Vibha ma'am and the area that she's with, documentation, museum. I understand the angle from which people are approaching it, that the sentiments are involved, because this is our culture, this is our heritage. But the fact is that it had been documented for so many years, and they were preserved, and they were there. And this is what has been so important for us people to understand also, that today, whatever we have, what is our culture, what is our tradition, let us start documenting it. Let us keep it on paper, because that is when we are able to show to the people that it belongs to us, so that it will not be misappropriated. So in short, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So the question itself is what the whole presentation is about, on anxiety. So um, I'm really not in a position to give a definite answer on whether new songs become part of the folk tradition, but here I think it's important to look at the question of representation, because in the last section where I've presented, I have talked about how these recreated forms of folk music tends to be categorized or represented as Naga folk music, whereas their reception in the local context is met with some kind of anxiety. So the question revolves around the question of representation. So that's what anxiety is all about. In that sense, this paper is not necessarily prescriptive in nature, but it's trying to discuss the tensions that are out there. Yeah.
Do you want me to respond to something? There's so many questions and things which I have kind of sorry. Yeah, okay. I've been getting questions also about the human remains. I, as a scholar, I keep my hands away from human remains, because it is a question for the community as to what they want to do, because it is about treatment of the dead, not only just of enemy, because some of the human remains are actually skull of an ankh from a, but I mean, some human remains have specific information as to whose skull it is, whether it was a trophy skull or whether it was taken from graves, what we call secondary burial among the Konyak Naga. So there is, I think, along with that is also a very difficult and history. So it is like opening old wounds, I would say. So it's the interacting, coming face to face with an object that relates to something that is part of a suppressed, difficult, and memory might have its own consequences. So I've been getting these questions that, okay, you've shown us the trophy and Peter's Museum is open to, communication with the communities and repatriation, but are they actually going to? So as far as I know, they are open. Some Naga scholars, I will not take the name because I think they have not made it open, and it's not fair of me to take their name because it was given to me in confidence. They have approached the museum, and probably they would probably with the Naga scholars group or other, there is a think tank in communities and states, and they decide as to, okay, what to do with this. I do know that certain head trophies in certain villages were buried, were given this kind of a third burial. And so that is not the concern of the museum as to what happens to them once they go back, whether they are put in a museum or they are given a Christian burial or a traditional burial or whatever. That is up to the community and the elders and the village and the clan. I mean, you have to see that whether it is decided as a community of Naga. Now again, the objects that are there are from different Naga communities, and right now they are divided between states. So what we were listening in the papers, in the panels in the morning, all that comes into the Naga collections, because Naga collections are from Naga Hills. Okay, the Manipur was separate at that time, but at the same time, all the questions of Naga areas coming together under a same sort of contiguous region, all those come up even with the objects, even though if they were collected in the late 19th century or early 20th century, as to how does the community look at it? Because is it a whole community's heritage, or is it specific to a village or a clan? So all these questions are raked up. So as because this is Naga Scholars Forum, we are all scholars, we can think of all kinds of issues. And then you have to think that, okay, there is a scholarly way of approaching it, but community has another way of approaching it. Are they going to analyze and say Charles Taylor said this and that? No, it is all a community's thing. And this is where I will just quickly say that, when I was showing you about the Lotha cloth, why were they so particular to know that what is written in the catalog? Because some of the cloths, due to certain reasons, the Lotha monograph was banned in Nagaland. So researchers like myself had access to it because it's available in almost all libraries in the world. All the Naga monographs are available in all libraries in the world. Even I, and it's only in 2006 that the Lotha Ho decided to release the Lotha monograph, which had been put under hold because of certain dispute about certain descriptions of the clans. Because we, as an anthropologist, also have to realize that the descriptions that are there in the monographs, they have come from individuals. So there could be disputes about the origin of a clan or the hierarchy of a clan. So these things don't go away. They are continuous disputes. Right now about the particular cloth, which which Irwin was talking about, Lyram Fee, and even in the chat, it was said no, but we have Tamkul Nagas have similar cloth, and we are having discussions. How can only the Metis say? So these things are there because of, I mean, the only way we can understand is that there must be histories of relationships, either gifting or people coming and branching out. So that is something that is a process. And among the Lotha Naga, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it was almost like saying that once the photographs are out and the information is out, what happens to it is very different. It's only the community then that who has the control. So there were certain cloths with the village names that became that village's cloth, and the community is trying, and the committee is trying to say that we cannot say that just because it's belonged to the village does not become that village's cloth, because it could be common to other ranges too. So how do you deal with that? Appropriations at different level, but also seeing a cloth which is a lungpinsa for Lotha Nagas is also worn by Sumi Naga women. Now there would be this thing that how come you're wearing, our cloth? And then we see in also in the museum collection, and then the Sumi ladies are telling me that no, this is our cloth, this is this thing. And I said, hands away, because my position is of a researcher. Because what is the inter-community? And this is where we see that how crystallization of community heritage is also taking place. Crystallization of what we call identity in inverted commas, that becomes associated with certain material culture. So this particular cloth is an our cloth, this particular cloth is this cloth. So that is what you see, that you see the lohe of Angami, but the similar lohe is also worn by the Chakhesang, it's also worn by the Mao people, it's also worn by some Zeme people. So how do you say, can we just say that it just belongs to one? How do we know? So that these are the questions, and that is where, at one level you can say that yes, Naga are all intermeshed, and that's why we exist as an ethne. you know there somebody had mentioned Smith's concept of ethne, that why people try to say but you all are different groups and this, but Naga as an ethne is also there because there are intermeshings. So, I mean, I think I'll stop here. I've spoken too much. But
Kiniseno, would you like to respond to any of the questions? Seems like maybe the question on memory and anguish might relate to your work as well. Well, if that's it for our comments, then I will turn this over to our session organizer for our vote of thanks.
All right, thank you so much. I sincerely thank all the speakers for sharing their wonderful words. There are a lot of scopes for further research on subject that has been presented. I hope the younger generation will take up research on such subject of importance. Very special thanks to Elspeth Iralu for chairing the session. Also, thanks to Pansy Jemmy and Sachoiba Inka for documenting the session. Lastly, but not the least, I would like to thank all our audience for joining us from across the globe. Tomorrow also, we have back-to-back technical sessions covering various topics, so I request all to please join us tomorrow and day after also. Until then, take care and good night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much to the chairperson and also all the resource person. Thank you very much. It was such an exciting session we have had today. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Please invite your friends because the Zoom has enough capacity, more than 500. So please, feel free to invite your friends to come and join us. Thank you very much, and good night to all of you. Yeah.